Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alan Matisow, Director of the Academic Programs at the Baker Institute. And I must say I'm impressed that the Monday night after Thanksgiving, so many people came out. I think partly it's the subject. The subject is Boko Haram. And as everybody knows, that is a jihadi group that has committed horrific crimes that basically baffle us in the general public. I mean, who are these people and what drives them to do what they do? Tonight, I think we've assembled a panel that's uniquely qualified to answer those questions. The moderator is David Cook. He's an associate professor of religion here at Rice. He got his BA from Hebrew University in Israel and his PhD in religious studies at the University of Chicago in 2002. His subject, as he passed through his education, was medieval Islam and a current of thought within it, apocalyptic thinking. And that thought has had a rebirth among jihadi groups. So David has spent a lot of the last decade, in fact more than that, studying these groups. And he doesn't necessarily get his information just from the library or from websites. He does field work. He has worked in Africa, all the way through the greater Middle East. He conducts interviews, knocks on doors, sometimes at great risk to himself, collects literature, has written dozens of articles, and for books. And I'm going to mention the title of these books because it'll give you some idea of what he does and what he's interested in. In 2005, Contemporary Muslim Apocalyptic Literature. Also in 2005, Understanding Jihad. 2007, Martyrdom in Islam. Also in 2007, The Faith and Practice of Martyrdom Operations, Understanding and Confronting Suicide Attacks. David was in Nigeria in 2005 when he ran across a group called the Nigerian Taliban. They were, in fact, the first name of what would become Boko Haram. He was there in 2009 in Nigeria, just before the Boko Haram uprising. 2009, the Baker Institute gave him a grant to study Boko Haram, and his first publication on that subject is in our website, and if you're interested in it, it's still there. In 2014, David and his collaborators began a long-term study of Boko Haram, and both of those collaborators are on our panel here tonight. That work is now done, and it will be published in January 2018 under the title, which is the title of the symposium tonight. So we're really fortunate to have David and our panel. Maybe they can help us answer the question of who are these people and what it is that drives them. David himself will moderate the panel and introduce the panelists, so welcome him to the podium.
Thank you so much, Director Matisow. I would especially like to thank Ambassador Jerigian and Director Matisow, who have supported my work now for the past 6 years and really have made this project possible. So without further ado, I just simply like to mention that this is the culmination of our project, of our long-term project to try and document Boko Haram, which so far has proved to be one of the most elusive of all the Salafi-jihadi groups that are present today. And so the bulk of the work has been done by my graduate student, Abdul Basit Qasim, who's going to present first. He's in the religion department. And his collaborator was Michael Nwamka, who has just recently received his PhD from the University of Roehampton in the UK. So both of them are the co-writers of this particular book, and they will start off by presenting it, and then they will be critiqued by Professor Amidou Sani, who is from Lagos State University. So he's come all this way to help us out and to help us see different aspects of the Boko Haram phenomenon that we have not seen. So without further ado, I'd like to present our panelists. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Today I'm going to be speaking about the Boko Haram reader from Nigerian Preachers to the Islamic State. I will love to start by also thanking the ambassador and Professor Ali Matuso, as well as my PhD supervisor, Professor David Cook. When I came to RISE in the fall of 2015, I started this project, and I would say it's actually been a long journey trying to study the primary source documents of Boko Haram. And I'm glad that the work is actually done, and now the knowledge is going to be made public. And I believe that the general public, will actually gain a lot from this reader. So today I would love to start by taking our memory back to 2009, when Boko Haram actually became a major news headline in Nigeria and around the world. In July 2009, Muhammad Yusuf and his followers at Marcus Ibn Taymiyyah Maiduguri, they actually engaged in confrontation with the Nigerian authorities, and it became a major headline. Since 2009 up till now in 2017, so many people are still asking the question, what is Boko Haram? How can we really understand this group? What exactly do they want to achieve? I have to say that all the speakers on this panel, we've actually tried at different points to write about the group. Professor Cook himself has written some articles about the group. In 2015, I also authored an article about the group as well. Michael has written some article on the group, as well as Professor Amidou Sani. But there's something missing, and that missing element is the main focus of the book, the Boko Haram reader. And what is actually missing is the paucity of engagement with the primary sources of Boko Haram itself. Most of the scholarship, most of the literature out there that have actually been published on the group, there's a paucity of engagement with the sources of Boko Haram. So most scholars and even policymakers and even journalists, they actually rely on secondary materials, probably like what the media actually say or what the government say, and no one is listening to what Boko Haram itself is saying. Now, why is it important for us to actually know what Boko Haram itself is saying? That is the essence of the Boko Haram reader. There's so many theories or so many ideas that have actually evolved around Boko Haram. There's so many debates as well that have evolved in the scholarly literature on the group. At the initial phase of research on Boko Haram, scholars have actually debated: is Boko Haram just a local group? Is it just a local insurgent group, or is Boko Haram actually affiliated to other groups in other parts of the world? This was actually a major debate around 2009 to 2011, and different scholars actually, they made several contributions to this. Now, in the Boko Haram reader, the reader itself is actually it's a combination of the visuals of the group, ideological pamphlets, never seen before documents, the poetry of the group as well, communique, and some other classified document that we're actually able to gain access to in the course of this research. So the Boko Haram reader answers so many questions. It's answers so many questions that surround that surround the group itself. And I think the first question that I would love to touch upon briefly in my talk today is about, is Boko Haram a local or a local jihadi group, or does it have does it have ties to different other jihadi groups around the world? As I said, this debate actually evolved in 2009, 2011. But from the document we're able to translate in the Boko Haram reader, we're actually providing to the public, I think for the first time, evidence that actually show Boko Haram communicating with other groups in the Sahara, right in the aftermath of the 2009 violent conflict. So in August 2009, just a month after the violent conflict, Abubakar Shekau was writing directly to Abu Musab Abdul Wadud in Algeria, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb. Shekau was actually writing to him. Shekau was soliciting support from him. Shekau was seeking for guidance as well on how to lead the Boko Haram movement. So all of this evidence, which they are mostly in Arabic, they're mostly in Hausa language and Kanuri, which is not really accessible to the scholars in academia as well as the general public, but these sources are now available. And I would say that recently the CIA actually released more than 470,000 files of Bin Laden. And among the documents that was actually translated for this Boko Haram reader, 2 of those documents were actually part of the files that the CIA actually released. So the reader, for the first time, we can now make that judgment that yes, as early as 2009, Boko Haram was actually having these ties, and it's important for us to know this. The second point is the Chibok kidnapping. So when the kidnapping occurred on April 14, 2014, it actually gained prominence. It gained a limelight. The former first lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, she campaigned, as well as different other celebrities. They actually spoke about the Chibok kidnapping, Bring Back Our Girls campaign. It was famous online. But when this particular campaign became viral, one of the questions that came to my mind is, but this actually is not surprising. Because so many scholars and even the general public, they treated the Chibok kidnapping as something, out of the blue. But because of actually been keeping tab with the primary source materials that the group itself have actually been producing and releasing to the public, it never came as a surprise. Because a month to that Chibok kidnapping, Abubakar Shekau have actually been speaking about the kidnapping. Not just Abubakar Shekau. Mohammed Yusuf, as early as 2008, he delivered a sermon in Maiduguri, and he was actually speaking about the theory of slavery. He was laying down the theory of slavery as early as 2008. He was speaking about the people who can legally be enslaved and those that cannot be enslaved. So when the Chibok kidnapping occurred, it really never came as a surprise. But it only came as a surprise for scholars who are actually not paying attention to what the group itself is saying. And I think there's a question that the Boko Haram reader is asking. And I think the third point I will briefly speak about is the issue of suicide bombing. So when Boko Haram carried out their first suicide bombing in June of 2011, when Mohammed Mangal actually bombed the police headquarters in Abuja, the Edit House in Abuja, it also spurred that element of shock and surprise. Well, and that's because this aphorism or like a popular maxim that Nigerians cannot commit suicide, that is not possible for Nigerians to actually commit suicide. But a year before this particular period, Boko Haram actually released a popular nasheed. That nasheed was titled, "We are not Boko Haram, we are the people of Sunnah." That's the title of the poetry, the nasheed. Now, in that particular poetry, they actually spoke about suicide bombing. Boko Haram themselves, they spoke about it, that, we are actually going to start embarking on suicide bombing. So it never really came as a surprise when Abubakar Mangal, in June 2011, when he embarked upon that suicide bombing. Now, this also shows the paucity of engagement with what Boko Haram itself is saying. And I think the fourth point I would love to bring is in 2012, when Ansaru, another group in Nigeria, actually evolved. When Ansaru evolved, many people were trying to make sense of Ansaru. Who is Ansaru? Where did it evolve from? What happened? But because there's actually a paucity of engagement with what Boko Haram itself is saying, so many scholars and even the general public and policymakers find it very difficult to understand Ansaru. Now, from the Boko Haram reader, we actually understand that before Ansaru evolved, there was a lot. They actually had a lot of internal ideological debates. Some elements of Ansaru actually felt that Boko Haram was going the wrong path, and they argued with Shekau that this is not what we set out to achieve in the Nigerian states. This is not what we set out to achieve in the Nigerian state, and you've actually taken us into a different path. So therefore, we can't continue on this wrong path with you. We have to set up our own movement. And in the Boko Haram reader, we also showed evidence that this debate, it wasn't just between the two groups. It was actually mediated by Al Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb. And Ansaru, they had to write to Al Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb, calling for Al Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb to mediate between the group. And I think the final point I would love to mention is the internal schism. So at the moment, there's actually an internal schism in Boko Haram. We have the Shekau faction, we have the Abu Musa Bagnari's faction, and now there's also that paucity of engagement with what the group is saying. And I think a very good example for this is just last week, there was a mosque attack at Mubi in Adamawa State. And when this mosque attack occurred, there so many academics and even policymakers, they couldn't really make sense. Why will Boko Haram start bombing mosques? I mean, why will they bomb their fellow Muslims who are also praying like them? Why will they bomb them? But the mosque attack itself did not occur out of a vacuum. There were actually different trajectory. There were different events, some of which have actually been explained in the Boko Haram reader, that clearly explain the debates within the group that actually led to the mosque attack, not just mosque attacks, but also attacks on IDP. So in a nutshell, the Boko Haram reader is a reference book, and the book itself actually show what has been missing, the missing elements in the study of Boko Haram. And I think scholars are going to benefit. Scholars in academia are going to benefit from the book. The policymaker are also going to benefit as well as the general public. Some of the unanswered questions about Boko Haram, I believe by the time you read this book, you will actually read for yourself what the group is saying, rather than depending on secondary materials. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdul Basit. We had wanted to have Abdul Basit present it first so that we would get a sense of the past of Boko Haram. And now we want to ask Michael to present to give us kind of a sense of the future. Please, Michael.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be back again. And I want to thank the Baker Institute for supporting my fellowship 2 years ago. I'll continue from where Abdul Basit stopped. There is a significant amount of literature on Boko Haram. And, it is still growing, yet there is not a comprehensive grasp of what Boko Haram stands for, like you rightly said. So the Boko Haram reader is an effort to present a clear picture in one piece of work. And we thought that the best way to proceed was to analyze materials produced by this group, as Abdul Basit has rightly said. So that included sermons, documents, videos, and audios that could give us a better insight into the ideology behind the actions of this group. But as some scholars have argued, scholars such as Michael Waza, they've argued that a group's stated objective is perhaps, a more important unit of analysis than its actions. In this sense, we would say Boko Haram's only goal would be to establish Sharia and consequently uprooting constitutional democracy. Clearly, the Boko Haram reader book is underpinned by a deliberate but painstaking drive to foreground the ideology that gave rise to Boko Haram, that inspires his actions, and also an effort to predict his future, which I'll be talking about. However, so unquestionably, the absence of a correct analysis of the ideology may have contributed in the past to the largely ineffective responses that the government had towards this insurgency. But however, any attempt to isolate or elevate one causal or motivational factor over others is most likely not the best response if we are to reduce or, if possibly, completely eliminate Boko Haram's threats and terror. So when we consider against this backdrop, we then come to appreciate the uniqueness of this book, and that is the interdisciplinary approach that we adopted in this group. So why Abdul Basit and Professor Cook's expertise and training in religious studies reflect in the theological evidence that was shown in this book. My role in the production of the book involves situating the theological stance within a broader, context by analyzing the social, the political, and the economic and military dimensions of the group. So this is quite interesting because considering that Boko Haram scholars are often divided, in the weighting that they give ideology and, other factors such as socioeconomic factors. So it is therefore very fascinating to see that the socio-political and other non-ideological factors is actually opposite rather than opposite to the theological perspective. But the credit for the seamless thread, of our individual thought and disciplines would have to go to Professor Cook for having to put that together. But at the end, there were more agreements than disagreements, as the transcribed text provide robust evidence for all but the economic dimension of Boko Haram, which is basically the idea of poverty as a direct causal factor. But if I move forward, but we then cannot say that poverty, or better still, economic deprivation is not a contributing factor, although we might argue that it's not a direct factor that contributes to Boko Haram insurgency. Ideology remains an important motivation, yet its importance and influence on Boko Haram's later actions, as can be found in the book, starting from 2004, started diminishing and started waning, and that is under Shekau's leadership. So why under Mohammed Yusuf we saw a very strong ideological stand and ideological basis for the actions of this group. Towards 2014, under Shekau, we begin to see that there seems to be a profound lack of deeper religious sentiment, but there were more attention to mundane issues. But then the limited use of theology by Shekau could be seen as a tool to prop up and perhaps conceal other non-ideological motivations that he had. But more so, if you see the growing attacks on mosques that Abdul Basit rightly said, and the pronouncement of takfir on other Muslims, this accounts for the fractionalization of the group and the infighting among its different splinter groups. So at its current state, we see a group that seems to have lost its original course and one that is looking to transform itself. So if I quickly move to discuss the shape and form that Boko Haram will take in the coming years. But before I quickly say that, I would like to emphasize that I do not in any way suggest that ideology is of any little importance. The scholarly engagement with the religious motivation of Boko Haram remains an invaluable asset to scholarship as much as it is to policy. So, of course, it provides the right context that can help us understand and reevaluate counterinsurgency strategies, such as the use of counter-narratives, interreligious dialogue, and religious legislation to censor religious preachers. So if we move to the future, so what is the future of Boko Haram? It would be disastrous to accept the narrative given by the Nigerian government that Boko Haram is defeated. Sometimes they use technically defeated such language. Undeniably, Boko Haram has suffered some losses. Conversely, the Nigerian military, with its allied forces, has made some great gains in recent years. But we see that Boko Haram, until recently, has been pushed to the fringes of the northeast and the border of Cameroon. But why commendable and relieving, Boko Haram is in no way finished. Arguably, we can correctly say that the Boko Haram loss is partly caused by the infighting and internal division. One can, of course, hope that this should lead to Boko Haram's demise. But Boko Haram has shown itself formidable against internal schisms, evident in the way it withstood earlier fragmentation that led to the birth of Ansaru in 2012. Abdul Basit mentioned Ansaru earlier on. But even as at then, we could see that even despite the disagreement between Boko Haram and Ansaru, they still went on to collaborate. So it is possible that the Shekau-led faction and the Al-Banawis faction will never reconcile their differences. But, we should also note that it's also possible that they could collaborate. So it is not unexpected that they can collaborate. So while there may be differences in terms of the targets, in terms of the Shekau-led faction attacking Muslims, there's still a lot of convergence on broader issues. So Boko Haram's continuous relevance is equally noted in its ability to negotiate the release of its detained commanders with the Nigerian government, obviously using some of the Chibok girls as a bargain. So what that shows is, although Boko Haram is often described as being loose and cell-like structure, leadership remains key to Boko Haram, to its survival. So Boko Haram has in the past lost some of its top commanders. Some have been killed, some have been arrested. So with the prisoner swap, we might begin to see the full benefits of the release of these commanders. So it does not appear to me that the Nigerian government was able to pull any weight, such as maybe persuading or dissuading Boko Haram from following the path of terror, other than the release of the kidnapped Chibok girls. So again, since President Buhari came into power, Boko Haram has escalated its use of suicide bombing. Abdul Basit mentioned that. So they've interpreted that to be a sign of Boko Haram's weakness or decline in power. But this is understandable if we consider that between the summer of 2015, between 2014 and the summer of 2015, there has been significantly fewer Boko Haram's brazen attacks in urban areas and on military targets, including otherwise formidable barracks, that were the day-to-day reality during this period. So, but it would be a mistake to underestimate a group that is skillful in transforming itself and one that adapts well to its environment. So throughout its trajectory, at different stages of its growth, Boko Haram has utilized both low-tech and low-level tools of violence or insurgency, as well as terrorism. But its use of suicide bombing has increased. It is my contention that suicide bombing remains a rational strategic tool rather than a tool of desperation, as the Nigerian military would have us believe. So then again, it is important to look at the environment and what it impacts. When I say environment, I mean look at the social, the political, and economic realities in northern Nigeria and its relevance to Boko Haram's future and choice of weapon. So there is no doubt that Boko Haram's insurgency, yields very high social, financial, psychological, humanitarian costs. So the economic livelihood of Northeast residents have been destroyed, leading to food insecurity, squeezing further a region that is considered the poorest in Nigeria. So in terms of social relations, one can only imagine what the next 5 to 10 years will look like for thousands of girls and women that have been kidnapped and abused by Boko Haram, children born out of sexual slavery, the stigma, as well as those, including minors, that have been coerced into violent acts. So if not properly managed, this can present potential recruitment for Boko Haram's army or the rise of another insurgent groups. So speaking of the potential rise of another insurgent group, one needs not look any far. We look at the Civilian Joint Task Force, which is a vigilante group comprising of Northeast youths who have organized themselves as a force against Boko Haram. So this group has been pro-government and have been useful or relevant in the successful military campaign against Boko Haram. But as Boko Haram's insurgency begins to wind down, one needs to ask, what is the future of this militarized youth? How do we demilitarize the youth? What alternative source of power do we offer people that have wielded so much power? And what are the social and economic plans in place? So if not carefully considered or managed, the Civilian Joint Task Force will remain a potential source and driver of future conflict. So it remains yet unclear if Boko Haram will leap beyond these internal divisions and unify its local and global concerns, as Abdul Basit mentioned earlier. So, but it may therefore become necessary to discourage any rapprochement between the different factions. Of course, how can we achieve this without seeming to be supporting one faction? That remains a challenge. But however, keeping the Shekau-led faction and the Al-Banawi faction apart remains desirable. At the same time, there will be need to address the non-ideological issues, which will include, improving civil-military relations, among other things. So evidently, we would have to be more accommodating to broad-based perspectives if we are to have any serious and long-lasting outcome in the response to Boko Haram. So, for instance, from a critical theory perspective, perhaps it is time to see Boko Haram as an insurgent group with the capability to make rational choices in its use of violence, just like any insurgent or conflict group, regardless of its religious base. So, and not fall to the trap of seeing Boko Haram as an irredeemable terrorist group that is impossible to engage with. So, as such, we would have to view religion differently, mostly seen as a viable currency and useful tool for groups such as Boko Haram to legitimize their acts of terror. So, because of time, we would then see that this book is very timely as it provides or seeks to answer key questions about Boko Haram that have remained unanswered or not satisfactorily answered. And one would be, why did Boko Haram resort to suicide bombing, and why has it escalated the use of such? Is it a tactical choice or a sign of its growing demise and waning capabilities? Two, why was Boko Haram attacking Christians and churches in 2012 and 2013, and why the decline in later years? Three, what is responsible for the increasing attack on Muslims? Four, what is the true value of kidnapping and hostage taking to Boko Haram? And why did it join ISIS, and what has been the gain so far? So all of these questions is what the Boko Haram reader, has attempted to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. So we wanted to make sure that you would have the opportunity to hear opposing views. So we invited Professor Amidu to critique our work. And so without further ado.
Thank you very much, Dave. Well, it's not necessarily an opposing view, but an alternative truth, quote unquote. I want to say that I've read the manuscript of the work, and I've discovered that, at least for the first time, you are able to access the original materials of the participants and observers in the Boko Haram phenomenon. You see, the Boko Haram thing is like a moving picture. You can only describe what you see at the point your camera catches the thing. And I'm happy to even tell you that even now, that this book is still in the gestation period, so to say, it has also inspired a similar thing, a similar trend in the academic world. There is this particular work coming up now, titled by Donald Holbrook, and it's entitled Al-Qaeda 2.0, a critical reader. Now, the idea is that the Western understanding of terror is handicapped by religious, cultural, and language barriers in most cases. And what this particular work on Boko Haram has done is to ensure that the original versions, the video sermons, interviews, letters, reading in Hausa or in Kanuri or in Arabic have now been translated into a language that we can all access. So we can see the views of the agents, provocateur of the movement in their original form. And it also reveals something to me when I went through the translation and that the Boko Haram never had a consistent policy of appropriation. And by this I mean, at some point they will say, no, we do not recognize any of the orthodox imams, Malik, Habu, and I mean, in Islam, we have what we call the four orthodox school of thought. So they said, well, we don't recognize them at a point when it's convenient for them. At another point, they would try to use their sources to prove their points because they knew that the general public, or most Muslim, except to take out the Shia of Iran and some part of the minority, so Muslim all over the world, the majority Muslim, I would say mainstream Islam, follow those four imams. And interestingly, the Salafi, what we call the Salafi groups, that is those who try to reintroduce orthodoxy and orthopraxis in the Islamic world, have some particular individuals they all respect. And all these people happen to have come from Saudi Arabia. Bun Baz, Uthaymin, and who's the other one now?
Albani.
Albani. Now, these remain the major authorities for the renewal movement or the plan to have Islam back to source, going back to source. And for those who are non-jihadists, who are non-militant, they also use the same source. So when Boko Haram actually started, what it sort of latched on was the security deficit in Nigeria. Since the Maitasini riot in the late 70s to 80, when Maitasini was actually defeated or wiped out, so to say, the security system relapsed. So nobody ever thought that the remnants who had gone to Cameroon, to Chad, will ever regroup. And so that was a particular problem that Nigeria had, that, okay, there was this relaxation or relapse of security, which allowed the Boko Haram to come together. And I think that is a particular problem. Now, coming back to the reader now, it's been divided into three by the authors themselves. Abdul Basit dealt with my materials from before 2009, that is when the movie actually became very violent. So sermons delivered by Muhammad Yusuf, letters, interviews, and whatever, on the ultimate goal of the movement, that is to establish the Islamic law, and without hiding their antipathy towards the democracy or the Nigerian government. Of course, they see the Nigerian government as a continuation of British Christian colonialism. So, and that was why it was convenient for them to see churches as symbols of colonialism, and to see Christian leaders as also collaborators against the Muslim system. So, and again, what David Cook was able to do actually in translating some of the materials from the network, because the question is whether Boko Haram is a local thing or not. At a point in time, it started as a local reform group, but the government allowed it to fester into a cancer, a terminal one for that matter. And so it was able to get some transborder collaboration and then transnational support once the leader. So the extrajudicial killing of his leader in 2009 actually provided what was required to transform the movement into a global something, such that the kind of charisma Muhammad Yusuf had was such that fitted into the situation in Nigeria, especially from that part of the country at that point in time. The issue of unemployment, youth restiveness, and all this kind of thing continue all over Nigeria. You can think along the line of the ethnic movements, either in Bakassi, the Niger Delta, all over. So this issue of youth unemployment, infrastructural decay continue to be a major topic. Of course, the Boko Haram movement and others were able to feed on this one and to provide an alternative. If the government failed in providing education, of course, we are here to assist you. If the government failed in providing you some basic things of life, of course. So, and that was the major thing that assisted Boko Haram to recruit extensively. And as if I'm talking to you now, a figure just released a few days ago indicated that every year about 2 million Nigerians, secondary school, are successful in the university examination, but only about 20% of this actually getting on board. So now, if a child attempts to go to university this year with a very good score, he fails. Next year again, he fails. So that one is already a breeding ground for discontent and for such people to be recruited to this kind of deviant movement. And so that is one area that Boko Haram has fed into and has consistently gain the support of the locals. And what actually interested me most is that now that we are talking of Boko Haram, the Baker Institute as a policy think tank, so to say, we should now be thinking along the line, okay, what can we do now to assist the system? Of course, we now have the materials, which of course will serve as a basis for further study and a more nuanced analysis of the thinking and the policies, because since the death of Muhammad Yusuf, of course, his main successor now is not as charismatic, and it seems to be more brutal and more unconcerned about human life. And again, we've not been able to see the conflict in terms of a historical rivalry between the Kanuri and the Hausa Fulani in Nigeria. The thing has a very long history of the jihad between the Sokoto Caliphate and the Kanuri Banuk Empire. So there has never been no love lost between the two. The Sokoto Hausa Fulani Caliphate of Danfodio and the Kanuri of... So while the Boko Haram is essentially a Kanuri affair, or the origin was purely Kanuri, the Ansar which actually came out of it is a purely Hausa Fulani response to it. So that thing is still playing out, and that has not been properly addressed. So my view is that now that we have these materials, and of course the alliance or the allegiance of the local Boko Harams, in spite of the internal division and schisms there, so there's this alliance to latch onto bin Laden. And the mistake probably the world made was that once bin Laden was killed, people seemed to be interested only in the ISIS, and not knowing that, of course, the machinery and the structure of Al-Qaeda is still there. And so if you decapitate the head, you see how the structure is such that it replaces itself, so to say. So now everybody's attention is now to ISIS. Now the Nigerian government is talking about decimating the Boko Haram. But we are not thinking about what happens in the next 10, 15 years, as Mike said that. What about all those children in IDP camps? What about those children who never had any opportunity for education at all? What happens to them? Because they are now in the state capital, Abuja, they are in Edo State and some other parts of the country where they are settled there. So no opportunity for schooling, no opportunity for any training or technical, whatever. And their parents are also there. Of course, they breed more now. They produce more children because they have free food. So now, what happens to all those boys and children in the next 10 years? Haven't seen the facilities in the state, in the cities and capital. That would be another set of Boko Haram in the making. And that is what we should try to address now. The issue of what will have sustained Boko Haram for long, that the ideology of the kind of education they've been having and the kind of social welfare program. And I think that is an area that we should also try to focus on. If there is a way of assisting all those who are taking care of, all these products of the Boko Haram empire, quote and unquote, if you're able to give them the right kind of education, if you're able to give them the right kind of empowerment, so that we will have sort of nullified a whole generation of new Boko Harams, it will be a very, very great thing for us to do. And because whether we like it or not, those who have been displaced from their original homes will prefer to go back because that's their ancestral place. They like to stay there, but because of the lack of security, because of lack of any empowerment, it's going to be very problematic for them to get back there. So what we should focus on now is that, we know what they are fighting for, which is quite unrealistic. We know they teach the wrong part or the wrong type of Islam. How can we assist those who are on ground to teach the right kind of Islam? I mean, counter knowledge, so to say. If they are given wrong, so I can have counter knowledge. But again, I disagree with the last speaker about the civilian JTF. The civilian JTF came on board due to the failure of established security apparatus because these were locals. It's called Joint Task Force, made up of the army, all the armed forces, and the locals who are quite familiar with the terrain. And so these people actually were able to identify who the real residents of a place were. So it was possible to get the arrowheads of the Boko Haram insurgency, and so they were. But again, they too became a bit overboard. They were reacting, and then it became also a tool for settling the local scores. But that can be tamed. So you do not throw a baby away with the bathwater. So, and I think the JTF can actually be moderated and given rules of engagement. But they are very, very essential because they know the local terrain, they know the local people, and of course they know the trouble spots. So we should try as much as possible now to find a way of empowering those who want to go back to the IDP, from the IDP come to their ancestral homes. And secondly, to provide the right atmosphere for those who are willing to be educated in the way that for a 10-year-old girl to accept to be on a suicide bombing mission, something must be wrong. Either because she didn't know what was going on, because we've had stories of parents who will even give out their daughters and get some money to allow them to go on suicide mission. So now, if a parent will do that to a child, so something must be wrong as well. And for how much will that have been? So these are kind of things that we should find out to actually tackle so that the original materials will actually benefit us. Thank you very much.
Okay, before we open up to general questions, what we'd like to do is have the first two panelists respond to anything that they would like to answer or to clarify, and have maybe some discussion between the panelists, and then we'll open up to the general floor. So please. Abdul Basit, would you like to, or Michael, would you like to?
I'd like to respond to Professor Sani's disagreement, because I don't really see disagreement. So the birth of the civilian JTF actually started, this was a double assault from the Nigerian military during the state of emergency. Because the northern east populace were seen as part of, like they were seen as protecting the insurgents. So the Nigerian military carried out a collective punishment on the populace. So the civilian JTF actually rose from that contest to protect against the Nigerian military's assault, and then it rose again against the Boko Haram assault. So it was like a double victim. But moving forward, the civilian JTF became pro-government and helping government. And actually, like he rightly mentioned, instrumental to the successful military campaign. But as we move forward, we need to establish or reinstate traditional authorities that the vacuum that the civilian JTF has taken over. And I don't think the civilian apparatus should be militarized or given such power. The civil-military relationship could be in terms of helping to give the security agents information rather than being involved in actual security or giving weapons.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah, let's bring it. Okay, Abdul Basit, do you want to?
Yes. I think I just have one point to mention, and is the question of poverty. And I think I've actually struggled really hard on this subject of poverty. And usually when I hear scholars and even policymakers speak about poverty, that, when we actually provide the social economy, when we improve the social economy condition of the people, the chances of them not returning back to terrorism is actually going to be high. While I do agree on this point, I have to say that the primary sources, looking at Boko Haram itself, it says really something different. And I will give one example of this. So in this year, just last month, Voice of America, they actually produced a documentary called Journeying from Evil. Now, that documentary was based on 18 hours recording that was obtained during the military raid of Boko Haram. That recording actually shows the life of the Boko Haram caliphates. The Boko Haram members, they were filming themselves, they were joking, they did all sorts of things in the video. The video was not released by Boko Haram. The military actually found this 18 hours recording, and Voice of America used this recording to produce a documentary called Journey from Evil. It's actually online. Now, when I look at this recording, I actually had access to examine some of this recording. When I see the Boko Haram members, they are so happy in their caliphates. They eat bread. They drink tea. They are really contented. They have that level of contentment in their caliphate. So I won't necessarily want to disagree about the issue of poverty, but I have to be honest. I, as a scholar on this subject, I've really struggled with this point because Northern Nigeria is not the only place where poverty is rampant in Africa. There are other places in Africa where poverty is rampant. So the question is, why exactly are we seeing this insurgency in this particular region of Nigeria? Why are we not seeing it in Equatorial Guinea? Why are we not seeing it in Botswana or in other places of Africa where people actually face extreme poverty? So I think on my part, I'm not trying to actually disclaim the poverty notion, but I've really struggled very hard with that fact.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Midu, do you want to respond?
Well, I just want to say that this concept of resource cost is very, very fundamental. People expect that with the large resources we have in Nigeria, human and material, things will be better, but it's the other way around. So that will have to be addressed. And secondly, the securitization of welfare organizations or NGOs that have now been taken off the radar, so to say, because in the past, you used to have some welfare organization from the Middle East, from the Gulf state, who come around and offer medical services and things like that, and schools. So, but all this now have been made a security risk by the Western government. That's they are sponsoring, they are agents of Al-Qaeda. So that one is also a very, very serious issue there. And the third one I want to say is that a particular formula that was used during one of the last regimes in Nigeria was this amnesty program and the empowerment of the Niger Delta. At a point in time, the Niger Delta was actually terrible. So, but the government, in its wisdom, said, okay, let us grant amnesty to all these people making trouble. Let us invite them, see from them what they actually wanted. And then there was this, so once this amnesty was granted, many of them submitted willingly their weapons, and then many of them started getting trained all over the whole world. So if that kind of thing had worked in the past, I wouldn't see any reason why it wouldn't work now. And I think the Baker Institute can offer some support in this regard. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to open up the floor to questions right now. If you can address the question to me, and I will try and repeat it so that everyone can hear it, and then we can pass it to whatever panelist will choose to answer. So please, sir.
Maybe because I didn't understand enough of the talk that was going on, but I didn't understand whether the book was taking a positive or negative effect on Boko Haram or on Sharia law, and I didn't know, do you consider that as a positive religion? And also, what about, do you see it as having a positive or negative impact on our world society?
Okay, so the question, as I understand it, is does the book take a positive or negative spin with regard to Sharia law and its effects upon the world? Is that what you were asking?
Boko Haram, really.
As Boko Haram? Would anybody like to answer that? I'll go to seat.
Yeah, I would love to answer that. I have to say that when the term Sharia law is mentioned, there is actually this reductionist understanding of Sharia law. That when people speak about Sharia law, they think about cutting the hands of people, stoning people to death. Sharia law is actually all-encompassing. It's not fixated on criminal law alone. Sharia law, it actually covers so many things that is often not discussed. I have to say that with respect to northern Nigeria, there's also that parochial and myopic understanding of Sharia law.
What about the book? That he asked about the book.
Yeah, so in the book actually shows Boko Haram's egregious interpretation of the Sharia law. So, for example, I will give one example is Boko Haram actually, they implemented a Sharia punishment on bestiality for a young boy. And when I look at the punishment, the way the punishment itself was actually conducted, it's antithetical to Islamic law itself. So, although Boko Haram actually pride itself as a group trying to implement Sharia law, but in their caliphate, while they're implementing this law, they actually flouted so many elements of the Islamic law itself, looking at the corpus. So, in essence, this is something that the book actually showed, that some of the flawed interpretation of Boko Haram itself.
Do you see Boko
Okay,
Haram as a plus or a minus?
Do you see Boko Haram as a plus or a minus?
It's a minus.
I gotta say, it's a minus. Okay, or please, ma'am. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wanted to know, regarding men, I know that was a policy that was instituted by former President Goodluck Jonathan. What did our current president, well, not so current, but what did Buhari do in terms of creating, how do I put it? What did he do in terms of curbing this Boko Haram problem in Nigeria?
Okay.
Clear throat strategy, like the Goodluck Jonathan did with men, or was it? What did they do? What did the last president?
Okay, so she's highlighted the policy of MEND, which is associated with Goodluck Jonathan, and is asking whether President Buhari has a coherent policy in dealing with Boko Haram. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, please. Anybody who wants to respond.
Well, let me just respond. For MEND simply means the Movement for the Emancipation of Niger Delta, which is a group of youth and militants from the creeks who are actually fighting for the control of the oil in that regard. So, and this particular group was the one Goodluck Jonathan had to give amnesty to and send on training and empowerment. Now, probably the first thing one could say, I'm not a government spokesman, but what Buhari actually did, even at his inauguration, was to move the operational area of the military to the theater of war itself. I mean, the war was being fought from Abuja, and if you happen to have read in the past few months or so, most of the resources that were allocated to the prosecution of the war actually ended up in the pockets of the military leaders. So they were happy for the war to have continued as long as that would give them more money. So, and Buhari was able to stop that. And of course, we will have had even judges, retired Air Force officers now being prosecuted. But you see, whether they will be either prosecuted or prosecuted at all is a different matter, because those who are on the other side of the bench or the bar, they probably were also beneficiaries. So that's what he's able to do, to stop the corruption in the fight against Boko Haram. Number one. Number two is that interestingly, the Boko Haram Zambisa something was actually created by Babangida, the former military leader. It was the Zambisa forest was actually a secret training camp for the army in the 70s to 80s. So nobody ever knew that until now became known that, okay, it actually was a theater of insurgency. It was part of the attempt to decimate the Nigerian military at that time so that they wouldn't be doing any coup. So it was just a ready-made material. So Buhari has been able to stop that and destroy that particular base in the Sambisa forest. And that was why it was possible to get back, apart from the negotiation we had about of some intermediaries, to get back some of the few Chibok guests we were able to get. So that's what's been able to...
But I think that she asked what are the coherent positive policies that he's trying.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, please.
So basically, why the major approach of Buhari has been military in terms of, saying we're going to stamp out Boko Haram within 3 months. There's also, before the previous administrator had, towards the Boko Haram, they had PINE. It was called Presidential Initiative for Northeastern States. They had the Victim Support Fund. They have the Safe School initiatives. But all of these policies were very scattered and ad hoc. So what Buhari did was to integrate, they had an overarching body that was called Presidential Committee on the Northeast. So that was to just integrate all of these scattered policies so that they could have a more coherent. And it came under Danjuma. So the former General Danjuma was the one that handled this. But again, if you look at it, what has happened is there's a whole lot of funds running into billions, that are domestically, but these funds are not used, towards this stuff. They're rather used for administrative purposes and, being siphoned away into other kind of stuff.
Okay, further questions, sir.
So, during your research, did you ever look at the link between the group and the politicians? Because most of the terrorist groups in Africa, there's always a clear link between them and politicians.
Okay, the question is did we look at the link between Boko Haram and politicians?
Yes, I looked at the political dimensions of it, tracing it down to from the 1978 we had the Sharia debate, and also looking at the OIC when Babangida to deflect attention away from the harshness of the austerity measures in the 80s following the recession. So, then also looking at the dawn of the Fourth Republic, where you had 11 northern states adopting Sharia for, to just, and what happened is they brought in this disaffected youth, including the founder of Boko Haram, Yusuf, who headed the Borno State Commission for Sharia. So they've, so that's what I'm saying. Sharia becomes, or religion becomes a tool for mobilization or to just deflect attention away from the reality on ground. So in that sense, the politicians may not directly, as most people think, support or sponsor, but they do use, the Sharia and use these narratives to their own, to further their own narrow political objectives.
Are you willing to name any names?
No. Okay. Please, sir.
Just to follow up on that.
Okay.
And to your point before, and also the point about the Kanuri versus the House of Fulani dimension. Thank you for that elucidation. I was not familiar with that point before. For the future, seeing the current trend that one former VP, Atiku, who comes from the Kanuri axis, and then the incumbent president coming from the Fulani axis, are potentially two powerful, charismatic future leaders. Do you see, to his point, that these leaders might now politicize and therefore weaponize the traditional religious rivalry and create further depth and crisis in the future of Boko Haram? Could it morph into something else more violent than what we see today because of the politicization of it?
Okay. So the question, as I see it, is do you feel that that current politicians are likely to exacerbate religious and political differences, or not? That's roughly what you're saying?
Okay. Yeah, please, whoever wants to
Well,
answer that.
I think it's always been there, perhaps in a very subtle way. And I tell you something now. Just last week, Atiku is reported to have defected to another party, the PDP party, where he originally belonged. Now, this stage has already been said that he's going to contest against Buhari in 2019. The National Assembly, according to the latest report, is also dividing along the lines now. That some want to go with Atiku, some want to go with those who are sure they are going to get their second term anyway with Atiku, obviously want to go. Some are already complaining that they don't even have enough money to contest for the next one. So Atiku is likely to be a very good candidate for them. So you can see that the stage is already set for the kind of division you are talking about, and they will use anything. At a point in time, a leader of the Senate, of Nigerian Senate, was accused of Ndume is his name. I can name that now. I'm safe. Because the court has declared him not innocent. That was the actual godfather of the Boko Haram. But he wasn't found guilty, so nothing anybody could do about that. So now even Ahmad Madu Sharif, who was the governor of the state, Borno, the birthplace of Boko Haram, we have it on record at a point in time. Of course, it's just been said that the Boko Haram leader was actually the state representative on the Sharia implementation. So when they fell out, of course, certainly things have to change. When music changes, the dancing step also changes. So that is the thing. So politicians have always used it for their own particular purposes, and it will continue under whatever guise.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to add. I'm just going to add to that. While I agree that Boko Haram is actually mostly from the Kanuri tribe, I have to say that in all the lectures of Mohammed Yusuf, in all the lectures, and even the lectures of Shekau and Al-Baghdadi at the moment, they actually discredit the Kanem-Borno Empire. They don't affiliate themselves with the Kanem-Borno Empire. Rather than affiliating themselves to the Kanem-Borno Empire, they affiliate themselves with the Sokoto Caliphate, because they see the Kanem-Borno Empire as actually the traitors to Islamic law. So they don't see themselves as part of that tradition. They don't see themselves, rather they ascribe themselves to the tradition from northwest Nigeria. So, and also I have to say that the members in the group as well, there've been a lot of claim that politicians at different points have engaged. There was a case of Usman Zawahiri. There was a case of Kabiru Sokoto, who was actually apprehended at the Borno State Lodge in Abuja. While I do agree that sometimes the politicians might play like the political spoilers they might play political spoilers to actually advance their own interest. The messaging of Boko Haram, those politicians are actually, they consider them infidels. They consider them, like, from their own theology, they consider those politicians as traitors to the Islamic law, as infidel, and not just the politician. And that's why Boko Haram was killing not just politicians, but also journalists, but also traditional rulers, but also aid workers, people who they feel that they are not holding to their own theology and also working against their own goal. They go after them and kill them. So they have this notion about this categories of people.
Okay, please, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. It was a very great presentation, and you've mentioned a lot of points, and I imagine that the Boko Haram reader is put in place so as to help scholars or think tanks and security agents to understand the group and know how to better contain it, if not completely eradicate their terror movements in northern Nigeria. You've mentioned that, I'm glad that you gave a historical with the Maitasini, because it seems as if this type of turmoil in northern Nigeria is not just a recent development. Going back even to the 1960s, before the Civil War, it was the ousting of Christians from northern Nigeria. And then again with the Maitasini, when they came up, it was again the ousting of Christians from northern Nigeria.
Please go to a question if possible.
Yes. So it's coming. And you've stated that it's not that you struggle with it being poverty issue. You've mentioned that they've used proselytized using social welfare benefits on their own, gathering young youth and so forth. So if those things are not the issue in terms of, again, the purpose of the reader perhaps being able to understand the group, then what can you say is a way to, what are the things, what do they want? I don't think that the lady at the top got her answer as to what is being offered to them. Clearly they want something. If it's not social welfare, if you feel that they are content, self-contained on their own, they don't want anything, is it a legitimizing of their group? Do they want to stand out as a, like in Christian...
Okay, we're going to have to bring this to a close here.
Right.
Okay, so, yeah. So what is the goal of Boko Haram, is what I'm understanding?
Form their own independent group of Muslims in Nigeria. Like they have independent churches in West Africa. Do they want to be an independent Islamic group?
Yeah, I think I actually got your question. So this is what I would say, that what Boko Haram wants, what they want is they want to have territorial control of some territories in Nigeria where they can actually establish their own interpretation of Sharia law. This is exactly what they want. They want to have that territory under their control. And in most of the sermons, and Shekau in his recent sermon, he spoke about this as well. They always speak about colonialism. They always speak about that, the formation of Nigeria itself is a marriage of convenience. The British colonialists actually brought incompatible elements together. In fact, Mohammed Yusuf actually said that this part of northern Nigeria was actually together with Niger, it was together with Chad, but when the British came, they took us and amalgamated us together with an incompatible element. So they always bring back that colonial rhetoric that we actually want our own territory where, we can have that. And recently what they're doing, they're trying to consolidate some of the territories they have under their control. They're trying to make sure that the Nigerian army is actually not taking back those territories from them. They want to have the territory under their control where they can implement their own interpretation of Sharia law, where they can also implement their own understanding of governance as well. That's exactly what they want in a nutshell.
Professor Amidu, you want to?
Well, I just want to add that what they want is not feasible and reasonable. Yes, they do not want any form of Western civilization, let me put it that way. But of course, they also use the videos of the invention from the West, the best of cars, Jeep, all this. So it's very hypocritical. The idea of having Sharia, Islamic law, by their interpretation anyway, because even Islam in its best position had Christians, non-Muslims under its rule, and they had, so it's not feasible. And the only thing the government could do, I think, is to de-radicalize, so to say, by providing the right atmosphere for you to know what is the real Islam. And that is all. So otherwise, what they want is not possible.
Okay. Michael, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I was going to say why, they might have a sense of loss of, and trying to reclaim back. But there's nothing unique about what Boko Haram is doing. It continues a tradition that's always been there. In northern Nigeria, there's always been, and there will always be a group that will stand up. So, but we should, like I've said, we should be careful to disassociate or treat it in isolation to just establish a Sharia state. Because if you look at Boko Haram's short-lived Boko Haram state, they didn't offer the alternative. They didn't offer, much to be desired. So we can't take the analysis away from the reality on ground, from the social, the political, the reality on ground. And to me, at the end of the day, like Irali said, it's an issue of inclusion and exclusion. They feel excluded, and it's power. Underneath everything is power. Underneath all this whole struggle is power.
Okay, sir, in the middle. Yeah, please.
That's a very short, quick question. What Boko Haram means? I understand what Haram means, what Boko means. Maybe that's the fundamental question.
What does Boko Haram mean?
Okay, I think probably Abdul Basit is best positioned.
Yeah, so Boko itself, it's from etymologically, it means, Boko means Western education, and Haram in that sense actually means forbidden. Now, this is very important. In Mohammed Yusuf's lecture, because often when we speak about Boko Haram, it's often explained that, Boko Haram, they actually detest the entirety of Western education. Muhammad Yusuf actually made this clear in his lecture, which is actually in the reader. Muhammad Yusuf said, when they asked him that, what is Boko Haram? Why are you saying Western education is forbidden? And Muhammad Yusuf said that knowledge can be classified into three spheres. The first knowledge is the knowledge that is actually compatible with the Quran and the Sunnah. If the education we're receiving is compatible with the Quran and the Sunnah, we will accept it. It is halal, it is permissible. But if the knowledge is actually contradictory to the Quran and the Sunnah, and I give example of subject like evolution being taught, evolution, or subjects that actually contradicts, according to him, some basic understanding of Islam. According to him, if this knowledge is being taught in a school setting, then it is impermissible for his followers and even for Muslims to attain such knowledge. And then the third categories of knowledge Muhammad Yusuf is playing, he said, the knowledge that neither contradicts neither contradict the Quran and the Sunnah. According to Muhammad Yusuf, he said this set of knowledge is best for the scholars in that particular territory to determine whether they can allow their children or their words or their followers to assess such type of knowledge. So this distinction is very important. They're not just against the whole of Western education, and that's why when the final clip when Muhammad Yusuf was interviewed, when it was before he was killed, they asked him, "You said Western education is forbidden, but look at you, you're using wristwatch, you're using this, you're using car." They asked him, and he actually said that I can use all of these because it does not contradict the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. The only thing I will accept is when the knowledge actually contradicts the Quran and the Sunnah. So this distinction is important.
Yeah, please, sir.
Nigeria is a huge country with hundreds of millions of people that is clearly in the midst of a cultural, social, and religious war. The United States, what is the interest of the United States of sending insufficient forces there that the only thing they achieve is risk for themselves, like what happened to 4 American soldiers not long ago?
Okay, so the question is what is the interest of the United States in all of this? To tell you the truth, the United States doesn't have an interest in it. There's a little factual inaccuracy in what you were pointing out. The American soldiers right there were killed in Niger. They were not fighting against Boko Haram. To the best of my knowledge, the United States doesn't. Does anybody know anything different? The United States doesn't actually have any troops fighting against Boko Haram. So
they only have advisory.
Okay, sir, please.
I got a 3-part question.
Okay, make it quick though, please.
First, how large is the group?
Okay, first question is how large is the group?
Are the numbers increasing, and have they reached areas beyond the northeast part of the country and the neighboring country? Is there any other country other than that general area?
Okay, yes. And so the other questions are, has Boko Haram spilled over into any other areas? And I think I'll just answer this myself here. So yes, Boko Haram did actually, during the course of 2014, 2015, spill over into Cameroon and into Chad. Into Niger. It has continued to carry out operations in Niger. Its operations in Chad have pretty much been curtailed, but it does definitely have bases in Cameroon. As to how large the group is, my estimate right now would probably be about maybe 10,000. I don't know whether maybe that might be a little bit too.
I think it's pretty much, because if we look at how many Boko Haram militants that the military have killed or claim to every week, if we put them together, we see that it's actually larger than 10,000.
Okay.
But it's also important that when we're speaking about the group as well, we shouldn't think about the group in a monolithic theme, because at the moment, Shekau actually has his own faction, Al-Barnari himself actually has his own faction, and each of this faction, they actually have their own members as well. And another thing they do, there's also conscription as well. They conscript young people forcefully into the group. And I think another thing they do, which is really important, is they are really showing, and they do it on social media, which is something I see. They're actually showing to the people the failing of the Nigerian state, that the Nigerian state they're trying to win the heart and mind. There's this constant battle of winning the heart and minds of the people, and they do this to gain more recruits.
Okay, sure. Please, in the far.
I
I taught in rural Kano State in the 1960s, and I see a lot of this the way it looked in the 1960s. And I think it's fair to say Kanuri was probably not the most favored ethno-linguistic group in northern Nigeria at the time. That they were pretty much on the bottom of things then. And I'm thinking, therefore, that if you took, say, the top 10 or 20 languages in Nigeria and asked to what degree has the federal government helped those groups or provided resources and advancement, I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be the case that Kanuri would be way down near the bottom.
Okay, so the question is to what degree is Kanuri valued inside Nigerian society?
Well, I would say that is why I've been saying that we shouldn't fall into the trap of, discarding, other realities. Because even during the 60s that you mentioned, there used to be the Bonu Youth Movement during the 60s, a group of disaffected youth. And like I said in my presentation, if this region, the kind of like the poorest in terms of when we talk about regions or geographical regions in Nigeria. So that needs to be addressed. We can't really just talk about the ideology without addressing these other issues as well.
Sir, back in the back row.
Yeah, given you mentioned that they're Islamic states, West African province, so do you find or did you analyze any similarities with ISIS with regard to how they finance their operations? We got a lot of insight recently with the media exposure to ISIS about kidnapping for ransom, oil revenue, and then on top of that, is there any similarity in their tactics of what we see with ISIS perpetrating wolf attacks and attacks attacks on Western targets rather than fighting a war in that territory?
Okay, so the question is what are the similarities to IS in terms of gaining finance, in terms of tactics, and so forth? So please, that's something that all of us, I think, could.
And with regard to the fact that in your title, you're making the reference that it's ISIS West African province.
Yeah.
Yes, so Islamic State West African Province, Boko Haram declared a pledge of allegiance to IS on March 15, 2015. The strength of the connection to Islamic States is still there and is still viable, but it's mainly coming from the Abu Musab al-Baghdadi faction and not the Shekau's faction. Now, with respect to the support that Islamic State actually gives to Islamic State West Africa, the support, as far as the document and what we've seen on the public is actually saying, the support is mostly coming from the media and logistical support in terms of like video production, in terms of, for example, in 2015, just some few months before the Pledge of Allegiance, Boko Haram media apparatus is actually is low in quality. But during that period when they pledged allegiance to the Islamic State, the media apparatus of the group was actually it's gained that prominence in terms of quality, in terms of even the graphics, in terms of the propaganda, the content of propaganda itself. So the support is mostly coming in terms of media. For financing, Islamic State West African Province actually rely more on local tax. So for example, in the documentary I was referring to, Journey from Evil, which was actually produced by Voice of America, they interviewed some locals. These locals are fishermen. So the locals actually explained that in the territories where the fish, which is popularly known as baga, in that particular fishing, that baga is known for fishing. The locals explained that, and that particular territory is controlled by Islamic State West African Province. Now the locals explained that the leaders of Islamic State West African Province, they tax them. So they actually pay tax. So that's one form of financing. They also get some other source of financing. I mentioned the AQR. So for example, in the Boko Haram reader, we actually found an evidence that in 2011, Al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb actually gave Boko Haram 200,000 euros. And that particular money actually helped them in the Bauchi prison break, which they did on September 4th, 2010. So they also gained some money as well from outside external actors. But for now, most of the finances is actually sourced locally.
Can I just add something to it?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Just one statement. So what I want to add beyond the media, where it's more visible in terms of ISIS is the media, like you mentioned. But I think in terms of finances, it's just ISIS is hamstrung by Boko Haram's, by the contention between Boko Haram's, especially the Shekau-led faction, focused on the local issues, while the Al-Banawi is focused on more global issues, so that is what is really hamstrung in terms of finances.
Okay, sir, in the back, yeah.
Just curious, in the primary sources that you've looked at, is there any reflection or commentary on the initial motorcycle stop incident that actually sparked events in my degree to elevate into later events that led to the growth of Boko Haram?
Okay, so the question is there a description of the initial motorcycle attack issue that led, at least supposedly, to the Boko Haram uprising in July of 2009? I'll just answer that. Yes, there is. There's extensive descriptions of that, actually, in the so-called Declaration of War, which is our text number 19. So, yeah. We'll take two more questions. Yeah, David, please.
Does extreme Islamic orthodoxy of Boko Haram give rise to violent cultural orthopraxy? Or does the violent orthopraxy arising from cultural factors...
Man, I should have asked you to write this down.
Islamic orthodoxy for its justification? The ideology, cultural vis-a-vis theological.
Well, can I add to that? Does it have to be one or the other? Because they seem to inform each other regardless. It's going to be a cycle no matter what. It's not just going to be one informing the other, and one is the causation and one is the effect.
It's an amazingly good question there, David. I just don't know whether we can go for it here, but Abdul Basit is probably the best.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to say I think Professor Ahmed Sani can actually comment on this as well because he's a professor of Islamic studies. I'm still a PhD student, but based
very much longer though.
But based on the sources, and the trajectory of what have actually been happening in northern Nigeria, Boko Haram did not evolve from a vacuum. This is something that is very important for us to actually understand. Boko Haram actually evolved through a pattern that started even before the pre-colonial period. So there's actually a pattern. What I mean by pattern, for example, after the British invasion, we had, for example, the revolts against the colonial order, and then in the late 90s, we had a Maitisani revolt. During that particular period, we also had the Salafi invasion as well. I won't call it Salafi intrusion. I mean, the development of Salafism. We also have Iranian influence in Nigeria in respect of Shiism. We also have the Muslim Brotherhood influence as well in Nigeria. The major group is Jama'at al-Tajdid al-Islam. So so many currents was already in play before Muhammad Yusuf actually came on board. And one thing that stood Muhammad Yusuf out was Muhammad Yusuf was more interested in politics and governance. For these other currents, they were comfortable with they were comfortable following the democratic route or the electoral route to achieve the power to implement Sharia law. But for Muhammad Yusuf, his own view is that no, we can't follow this route. The only route you can actually follow is for us to preach for some years. Then after preaching, we embark on confrontation with the Nigerian states because that's the only means. So his own method of bringing reform was actually what stood him out. But I think Professor Ahmed Sani can add to this.
Please.
Just a little point, actually. See, for all the Salafi groups, you see, we tend to mix up all these trends. There are some who actually want pure religious performance. That, okay, once I'm able to perform their religious duties, whatever, I don't want to get involved in politics. But the Boko Haram thing is something total, that the Sharia transcends mere religious pronouncement, orthopraxis, orthodoxy combined. So that is their own goal. And that's why they are saying that, well, if you have a government that is not practicing the Islamic law, you have two options. You either migrate from that locality, which they did in the first instance, where they had their own cell, or you force out that government to install your understanding of Sharia. So the ultimate is to establish orthopraxis and orthodoxy at the same time. So no division between cultural or theological. Both are combined. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one last question, please, sir.
Yeah, you talk about Sharia laws and laws of Islam. How come they kidnap girls and they do things to women? And
Okay, so the question is what is the relationship between Sharia law and the kidnapping for sexual slavery?
there is no relationship.
I think
There's an extensive relationship.
Yeah, I have to say that this particular question you ask is a very tough one for me to answer, because there's actually a lot of, I won't want to call it denialism about this subject, and there's a lot of contention as well. Now, what I would say is, before colonialism in northern Nigeria, we actually are the pre-colonial Islamic caliphates. Now, this caliphates were engaging in slavery. Slavery was a justifiable institution. In fact, Danfodio, who was actually the leader of the Sokoto Caliphate, he laid out a theory of slavery, that these people are the people that can be enslaved, these other people are people that cannot be enslaved. He had categories of people that can be enslaved and people that cannot be enslaved. Now, when the colonial masters came, when the caliphate was decimated, this theory of slavery was suspended. It wasn't officiated. Now, what happened with Boko Haram is Shekau actually went back to unearth this theory of slavery. So Shekau is now saying today that no, slavery is a justifiable institution in our society even before the British colonialists came. These are the people that our forefathers said can be enslaved. These are the people that cannot be enslaved. So in his own theory, the people from Chibok, because it's a predominantly Christian town, according to his own theory and based on what the precedent that happened in the region, Shekau actually believed that those people can be enslaved. Now, the problem that actually occurred was when he went to Burma. Now, Burma is predominantly a Muslim domain. Now, Shekau actually argued that the people there can also be enslaved. Then Mamano and Abu Musa Barnawi actually said, no, those people cannot be enslaved because they're actually Muslims. And Shekau actually argued that no, they are not Muslims because they believe in democracy. They don't do the zavawah of the government of unbelief. So therefore, they can be enslaved. And this schism in the group actually tore the group apart. So this is an important question I think Northern Nigeria we have to answer. How do we deal with some of the literature in the pre-colonial period that actually justifies some things that today we will find so uncomfortable? What are we going to do with those literature, especially now that Boko Haram is bringing all those literature to our face? It's important for the societies to have a discussion on that.
Yeah, it's no problem finding pre-colonial discussions of slavery and stuff. And basically the Borno Caliphate, I mean, that the whole Sultanate was basically a slaving state. I mean, you have so much documentation of that going all the way back into the 1500s. So Shekau is essentially harking back to a deeper historical past that is rather uncomfortable today, but it has a great deal of documentation. So, okay, with that, we're going to bring this to a close. So I'd like to thank our three panelists. Please join me in thanking them.